Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome to the Final Say radio show Scott Rasmussen of Rasmussen Reports and author of the recent book, The People's Money. If you go to RasmussenReports.com, you'll be able to check out that book and many others, and all the latest and greatest polls from Rasmussen Reports, which the Final Say radio show follows. Scott Rasmussen, welcome to the program. You're on with Brett Rappaport and John Rappaport.
It's great to be with you guys.
Well, I'm always fascinated by the polling that you guys do, and I find them to be extremely accurate in the fact that your polling deals with likely voters, not just random people who happen to pick up the phone.
You know, that's something that all polling firms will do in September and October. We are one of the few firms that does that earlier in the season, and obviously it's a little more challenging to project likely voters in August than it will be in October, but it does give you a better sense of how the vote is actually likely to turn out.
Sure, absolutely. So now we're looking at some of the recent polling that you guys have done, and for instance, 29% are saying the U.S. is headed in the right direction. Now, 29% doesn't seem like a very good number. How does that stand historically?
It's not a very good number. You know, if you take a look at just the Obama time in office, he came in when the number who said we're heading in the right directions was in the low to mid-teens. And in the first 3 or 4 months President Obama was in office, confidence that we were moving in the right direction moved all the way up to 40%. It slipped a little bit for a while into the mid-30s. And then for most of the last few months, it's been around 28, 29, 30, 31%. Not where the president would like it to be, but not as bad as it was some points last summer.
Okay, very good. Now, I've actually had a lot of questions from some of our followers discussing the idea of how Barack Obama and Mitt Romney were doing in the swing states, such as Ohio or Florida or Pennsylvania, for example. What are your polls showing in terms of the swing states?
Well, swing states cover a lot of different territory depending on who you're talking to. In Florida and Ohio, the race is very, very close. Every time we're polling, it's 1 or 2 points, one direction or the other. And I don't think we'll have any clarity on that for any period of time. When you get to North Carolina, that appears to be slipping a little bit into Mitt Romney's camp. Pennsylvania is always a state that interests Republicans, and maybe this year a little more than others, but it is still very likely to end up voting for Barack Obama. In my mind, the big states, the biggest state could very well be Virginia, a state that used to be reliably Republican, but as more federal employees move into northern Virginia, it's become a pure toss-up state.
Yeah, that's very interesting considering quite a few of the elected members, including the governor, or members of the GOP there.
That's right. You know, and Barack Obama was the first Democrat to win Virginia since the Beatles were a brand new act in America. So it's, you know, it's becoming a long tradition. But the fact is it has changed, and the question will be probably determined by turnout and intensity. 4 years ago, Barack Obama had a huge financial advantage over John McCain, and he blanketed the state of Virginia with commercials down the stretch, promising to cut taxes for 95% of all Americans. He sounded very much like Ronald Reagan and managed to pull off a significant victory. I doubt he'll win by that margin this time around, but it really is too early to tell who will take that state.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Now, as far as the issues go, obviously the economy is the big issue that the Romney campaign would like to be discussing, and I'm sure it's probably one of the last issues that the Obama campaign would like to be touching on. But in your polling, what do Americans want to hear from these two candidates? What are the issues?
Well, the economy, broadly speaking, is the first, second, and third most important issue. Anything else, when you talk about health care or energy policy, people want to hear how it ties into the economy. In other words, if Mitt Romney were to make the case that the health care law is bad and it's a drag on the economy, that's more powerful than just talking about health care independently. If he talks about his energy policy would spur economic growth, that's a better connection. The other issue other than the economy that people would love to see addressed is ethics and corruption. But on that point, there's very little optimism. Voters don't think either side has any serious interest in improving the ethics of our political process.
No, that's very interesting. So in going back to the economy, if we looked at some of the smaller or more defined issues, such as whether or not we should allow the so-called Bush tax rates to go back up to what they were before those were in place, how are the voters feeling on those types of issues, or the extension of reduced employment rates?
Well, broadly speaking, people believe that cuts in spending and cuts in the deficit are good for the economy. They believe that cutting taxes is generally good for the economy, and overwhelmingly, Americans would like to see the Bush tax cuts extended. There is a distinction between whether they would like to see them all extended or just for those who make less than $250,000 a year. The country's pretty evenly divided on that point. But when you talk about that as an issue, I think the way people are experiencing is that they don't believe that Mitt Romney or Barack Obama has a real good plan for moving forward. They haven't seen a positive approach that they believe in. But what they are following is the way their own personal finances are working out. And right now, 33% of Americans say their own finances are in good shape. That's down 2 points since the day Barack Obama took office. It's down 10 points from the fall of 2008. If that doesn't improve, the president will lose his job. He's hoping to get that number up, a few more points before Election Day.
Yeah, well, he doesn't have all that much time.
No, and by the way, it's not something that he can control, and this is one of the things that people forget about campaigns. They want to analyze every speech and every gaffe and every campaign commercial, and, for the most part, in most campaigns, those things will cancel each other out. We have two candidates in this race, neither of whom connects very well with working-class voters. Barack Obama lost them to Hillary Clinton in his primaries. Mitt Romney lost them to whoever was I'm not Mitt Romney in his primary battles. And so you've got these guys who don't connect very well, but the fundamentals, the way the economy is working, that's what people are looking for.
Scott, this is John Rappaport. Welcome to the program. We'll look forward to having you on a regular basis. So, quick question I have for you is, when you look at the 29% number, clearly that wouldn't make anybody running for office feel good. But the question comes down to how much of that 29% would the average, at least your respondents, be blaming on the executive branch itself, as opposed to looking at Congress, which historically, or certainly in recent history, has had far worse numbers than the president?
Well, yeah, Congress almost always has worse numbers than the president, and I think the proper answer to your question is Americans think there's plenty of blame to go around. They believe the Bush administration got us into the recession, and the Obama administration has made things worse. They're not thrilled with the way Congress is performing, and they're not even sure they're thrilled with the Supreme Court. People are generally unhappy with the way our government institutions are responding, and that's the reason it doesn't translate directly into support or opposition to President Obama. What we find is there are a lot of people who think the country is heading in the wrong direction, but aren't convinced Mitt Romney would do anything differently or do anything to improve that direction. And this is the challenge. People, when they look at political campaigns, they want to say, what is it the candidate can do to change the dynamics? For the most part, the only way you change the public perception is by the way you govern. Ronald Reagan in 1979 was seen as a candidate who could not win by the Republican establishment. He was unelectable, and when he did win, people didn't have much in the way of expectations for him. But he changed that perception by what he did in office, and that's what will have to happen if Mitt Romney wins, or if Barack Obama is reelected. He will have another chance to change public perception of him.
In your polling, have you gotten feedback that gives you an indication of what the turnout trend is looking like? Do you expect that this highly contested election is likely to be drawing a lot more voters, or is the frustration likely to manifest itself in apathy?
The interest in the campaign is a little bit lower than it was in 2004 and 2008. It's also shifted dramatically. In 2008, interest in the campaign was much higher among Democrats than Republicans. This time, the reverse is true. When you talk about what does that look like for turnout on Election Day, in 2004, the Republicans had their best turnout for a presidential election ever, 37% Republican, 37% Democrat, dead even. In 2008, the Democrats had their best turnout in more than 20 years, and they had a 7-point advantage, 39 to 32. It is likely that this year will be much closer to even because of the heightened Republican interest and because fewer Americans today consider themselves Democrats than were willing to make that claim 4 years ago.
Well, that's good to hear. Well, Scott Rasmussen, once again, I want to thank you so much for joining us this week on the Final Say radio show. I want to direct our listeners to RasmussenReports.com. If you do go to our website, we have a link there. You just click on it, brings it right to Rasmussen Reports. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to speaking with you again next week.
Look forward to it as well. Thank you.